Welcome back. Today's episode drops us into the pristine, sunlit suburbs of Ivy Creek, where behind white picket fences and perfectly manicured lawns, a quiet war is brewing. Meet Ethan Carter, a 34-year-old software engineer who thought his biggest battle would be debugging code. Instead, he's locked in an unspoken feud with the queen of the HOA, Beverly Langston, a woman who enforces community standards with the iron fist of a dictator and the pettiness of a schoolyard bully. Picture this: a crisp morning, the scent of fresh-cut grass in the air, birds chirping in the distance. Ethan steps onto his back patio, coffee in hand, ready to soak in the peace of his backyard oasis. But something's wrong. The pool, his perfectly maintained, crystal-clear pool, is churning, frothing, alive. Thousands of soap bubbles surge over the edge, cascading onto the deck like a foamy tidal wave. The pristine blue water is gone, replaced by an endless eruption of white, creeping toward the lawn like a slow-moving avalanche. For a second, he wonders if he's still dreaming. Maybe it's a chlorine reaction or some bizarre chemical fluke. But then, his gaze locks onto the security camera feed, a telltale trail of sudsy streaks on the pavement, a familiar silhouette moving in the shadows. And then, there she is, Beverly Langston, standing over his pool like some self-appointed executioner, emptying an industrial-sized container of detergent straight into the water. The woman doesn't even look guilty. She gives the bottle one final shake, ensuring every last grain dissolves into the disaster she's created, then struts away as if she's just done the neighborhood a favor. Ethan's grip tightens around his coffee mug. This isn't just an HOA dispute anymore. This is war. Ethan Carter stood at the edge of his deck, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the swirling chaos of his once pristine pool. The morning sun glared off the bubbling surface, each foam-tipped wave lapping at the edges like a restless beast trying to claw its way free. His backyard oasis had been turned into a washing machine from hell, his jaw tensed. Beverly Langston. She had been a problem since day one, since the moment he moved into his house at the edge of Ivy Creek, technically outside HOA jurisdiction, but still close enough for Beverly to wield her self-appointed authority like a weapon. He hadn't cared at first. He kept his lawn trimmed, his home maintained, his property in order. But that didn't stop the petty notices, the passive-aggressive letters tucked under his door, the friendly reminders about neighborhood harmony. At first, he ignored them. Then came the fines, absurd violations for nonsense infractions. His mailbox was the wrong shade of black. His outdoor lights weren't community standard. His backyard, a private space, had visual discrepancies. That last one had made him laugh. He wasn't even part of the HOA, but Beverly had a way of bending reality to fit her narrative. Ethan exhaled, forcing himself to loosen the grip on his coffee mug before he shattered it. This time she had gone too far. A car pulled into his driveway, tires crunching against the pavement. Nick Dawson. Ethan didn't need to turn around to know his best friend was already grinning at the chaos. "Jesus, man," Nick called out, stepping onto the deck. "Did you open a bubble factory overnight and forget to invite me?" Ethan shot him a look before pointing at his phone. The security footage paused on Beverly, mid-pour, her face lit with righteous satisfaction. Nick let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. The queen strikes again." "Oh, she thinks she's won," Ethan muttered. "She thinks I'll just drain the pool, clean it up, and let it go." Nick leaned on the railing, watching the soapy flood lap at the grass. "And you're not?" Ethan's grip tightened around the phone. "Not this time." Nick studied him, then slowly grinned. "You know, I like that look in your eye. It means you've got a plan." Ethan didn't. Not yet, but he would. Because this wasn't just about soap or pools or HOA rules anymore. This was Beverly's final mistake, and before this was over, she was going to regret ever thinking she could control him. Nick patted him on the shoulder. "Well, whatever you're cooking up, count me in. I say we make this one for the history books." Ethan glanced at the foamy wreckage, then back at Nick. A slow, deliberate grin spread across his face. "Oh, it will be." Ethan stepped into the Ivy Creek Community Center, the air thick with the artificial chill of overworked AC and the stifling weight of HOA bureaucracy. The meeting room was packed, rows of folding chairs filled with homeowners who either dreaded Beverly Langston's reign or blindly worshipped it. A low murmur rippled through the crowd as he entered, a mix of curiosity and amusement. They knew. Word spread fast in this neighborhood. At the front of the room, Beverly stood like a monarch addressing her court, her perfectly coiffed bob unmoving despite the ceiling fan whirring overhead. She was in her element here, powerful, untouchable. And as I was saying, she continued, voice smooth and rehearsed, we must enforce stricter aesthetic standards in Ivy Creek. Our community's image depends on it. Her gaze flicked to Ethan, the subtlety of a gunshot. She wanted him to react. Ethan took his time. He let the moment stretch, let the silence sit heavy before raising his hand. Beverly exhaled like she was already exhausted. Yes, Ethan. He stood, holding up his phone. The screen flashed with a paused security feed. Beverly, mid-dump, the industrial detergent pouring like a waterfall into his pool. Would you say that sabotaging someone's property counts as an HOA violation? His voice was calm, measured, but the undercurrent of challenge was unmistakable. A ripple of nervous chuckles spread through the room. Someone in the back muttered, "Oh, this is gonna be good." Beverly didn't flinch. She was a pro at this. "I don't know what you're implying," she said smoothly, "but if you're referring to that," she waved a dismissive hand, "incident, I was merely ensuring neighborhood cleanliness." The gall. Ethan took a slow breath, keeping his voice level. "You dumped soap into my pool." Beverly gave a tight-lipped smile. "Perhaps this is a sign you should consider redesigning it to better fit community standards." A murmur of whispers, a few stifled laughs. Even her usual loyalists were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Nick leaned over and muttered, "She's good. Evil, but good." Ethan exhaled through his nose. She thought she had won, thought she had flipped the narrative, made herself the victim, twisted this into another justification for her reign. That was her first mistake. He turned to the crowd. "Show of hands. Who here thinks Beverly is completely full of—" "Enough," Beverly snapped. But the damage was done. The murmurs had turned to chuckling. She was losing control. Beverly straightened, regaining her composure. "If you have an issue, you're welcome to file a complaint through proper channels." Nick snorted. "Like you process complaints that aren't yours?" More laughter. Ethan clenched his jaw. She was getting away with it. Again. Then Nick leaned in, voice low, eyes gleaming with mischief. "You know," he whispered, "if you drain that pool, all that soap's gotta go somewhere." Ethan blinked. Then he grinned. Beverly wanted to play dirty? Fine. He'd play dirty too. The hose hissed softly in the stillness of the night, a thin, steady stream of soapy water trickling from Ethan's pool, winding like a snake across the grass toward Beverly Langston's perfectly manicured lawn. The glow of a distant street lamp caught the glistening bubbles as they seeped into the soil, sinking into the roots of the pride and joy she'd spent years obsessively curating. Ethan crouched beside Nick, his pulse thrumming in his ears. "It's working," Nick whispered, watching the foam spread. "By morning, she's gonna wake up to a disaster." Ethan didn't reply. Something gnawed at the back of his mind. A whisper of unease he couldn't quite shake. They had planned it out. Precise, controlled, a silent retaliation. Draining his ruined pool onto her lawn was poetic justice. It made sense. Right? A breeze rustled the hedges. The hose gurgled, coughing out another stream of soapy runoff, and Ethan found himself frowning, scanning the yard. The water was moving faster than expected, flowing past Beverly's pristine flower beds, pooling at the base of her stone pathway. Something wasn't right. Nick nudged him. "Dude, you're overthinking it." Ethan swallowed, forcing a nod, but a new thought crept in. What if it didn't stop at her lawn? What if the soap, thicker, slicker than regular water, kept flowing, rolling downhill? A drip of sweat slid down his temple. He turned, eyes narrowing at the subtle incline of the street. Oh no. Nick saw it at the same time. "Wait!" A gust of wind blew through, shifting the foam just enough to reveal the nightmare unfolding. The bubbles weren't just soaking into Beverly's yard, they were moving, crawling, slithering, expanding, spreading beyond her property line, downhill, toward the other houses. Ethan's breath caught. Nick's jaw went slack. Oh, hell! They bolted up, but it was already too late. The gentle trickle had turned into an unstoppable tide. Foam swirled through the cracks of Beverly's stone path, gushed over her rose bushes, and cascaded toward the neighboring lawns. And then, the first streetlight flicked on. A window creaked. A voice, groggy, confused. "What the—" Ethan grabbed Nick's sleeve, yanking him back into the shadows. They held their breath, watching as the suds rolled like ghostly fog, creeping across driveways, slipping under fences. Then, the inevitable. The first scream, then another. Lights clicked on across the block. Curtains jerked open. And then, from the center of the chaos, Beverly's voice, a shriek, high and sharp, slicing through the night like a siren. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Nick exhaled. Welp, that escalated. Ethan swallowed hard. This wasn't justice anymore. This was a catastrophe. A wall of white churned down the street, rolling past flower beds, swallowing sidewalks, slithering under fences like a creeping tide. Porch lights flicked on one by one, illuminating the chaos. Neighbors stumbled onto their lawns, robes flapping, slippers soaked, mouths agape as their carefully manicured worlds drowned in foam. But nothing was louder than Beverly Langston's scream. Ethan stood frozen on the edge of the street, heart hammering. The plan had worked too well. What was supposed to be a controlled act of poetic justice had become a full-blown suburban disaster. Beverly stormed onto her porch, hair wrapped in curlers, slippers sinking into the soapy mire that used to be her award-winning lawn. She took one look at the mess, her pristine rose bushes now blanketed in white, her sprinkler system gurgling helplessly against the flood, and turned laser-focused straight at Ethan. "You!" The word hit like a gunshot. She charged through the foam, arms flailing, eyes wild. "You did this! You and your filthy, disgusting pool!" Ethan barely had time to open his mouth before she was inches away, jabbing a finger at his chest, spitting accusations like venom. Nick, standing a step behind him, let out a low whistle. Gotta say, didn't expect the whole street to go down with her. Ethan ignored him, pulse pounding. This was bad. The front doors of several houses swung open. More voices, more outrage. "My lawn! My flowers! What the hell is this?" The neighborhood was turning on him. And then, another voice. A new player stepped into the chaos. "Ma'am, I need you to step back." The city inspector, middle-aged, tired, and looking like he'd seen his fair share of suburban nightmares. He strode into the mess, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the foamy wreckage. Beverly pivoted instantly, seizing the moment. "Officer, this man, this criminal, intentionally sabotaged my property. I want him fined, arrested, removed from the community." The inspector barely blinked. He had seen Beverly Langston's type before. Ethan crossed his arms. "You sure you want to talk about crimes, Beverly?" For the first time, a flicker of hesitation crossed her face. Nick pulled out his phone, the final nail in the coffin. "Tell me, Bev," he said, tapping the screen. "Would you like to explain why the city's records show that for the last 10 years, you've been illegally siphoning water from the main line?" The world lurched. The laughter in the crowd died instantly. Beverly's mouth opened, then closed. She turned to the inspector. "That's a lie." The inspector scrolled through the documents on Nick's phone. His expression darkened. "These are official records," he muttered. "And if this is accurate, you're looking at serious charges." The street fell into dead silence. For the first time, Beverly looked afraid. Beverly Langston stood frozen in the wreckage of her once perfect kingdom. Her lawn, the pride of Ivy Creek, lay in ruins, a soggy, soapy wasteland that stretched across the block like the aftermath of a suburban apocalypse. The people she once ruled with an iron fist no longer looked at her with deference. Now they only saw the truth. The city inspector's voice broke the silence. "Ma'am, we'll be conducting a full investigation into your unauthorized water use. You might want to get a lawyer." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Beverly Langston, untouchable, Unstoppable Beverly was finally facing real consequences. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her hands, still clenched at her sides, trembled slightly. Then, without a word, she turned and walked inside, shutting the door behind her. No grand defense, no excuses, just silence. Ethan exhaled, the weight of the moment settling over him. It was over, or at least he thought it was. A week passed. The soap eventually drained away, leaving behind patchy, ruined lawns and flower beds stripped bare. The HOA board held an emergency meeting, and for the first time in Ivy Creek history, the vote to remove Beverly was unanimous. Ethan had expected to feel triumphant. He had won, but why didn't it feel like a victory? He found himself staring at Beverly's house one afternoon, watching as she stood in her yard, hands on her hips, surveying the damage. She looked smaller, deflated. Nick strolled up beside him, sipping a beer. "If you go over there, I'm legally required to call you a soft idiot." Ethan sighed. He knew Beverly had been terrible, ruthless, petty, controlling. But now she was just alone. Before he could overthink it, he walked across the street. Beverly stiffened as he approached. Her eyes, once sharp with superiority, were tired. She didn't speak, just waited. Ethan stopped a few feet away, gestured at the mess. "Gotta admit, it doesn't look great." A beat of silence. Then, to his shock, she let out a dry, bitter laugh. "It doesn't?" Ethan shifted. "Look, I'm not saying we're going to be friends or anything, but..." He hesitated, then sighed. "If you want some help fixing this, I know a guy who does landscaping. He won't rip you off." Beverly studied him, searching for a trick, a trap. When she found none, something in her posture eased, just slightly. "Why would you help me?" Ethan shrugged. "Because I'm tired and this whole thing has been exhausting." He cracked a small smile. "And because, deep down, I don't think you actually like being the villain." Beverly didn't smile back. Not yet, but she nodded, and that was enough. As Ethan turned to leave, he knew things wouldn't be perfect, but maybe, just maybe, Ivy Creek would be better off without a dictator. And maybe so would Beverly. The sun dipped low over Ivy Creek, casting long shadows across a neighborhood forever changed. The last remnants of foam had dried, leaving behind stark evidence of the chaos that had unfolded. The once perfect lawns now patchy, the HOA's iron grip now loosened, and at the center of it all, Beverly Langston, no longer the queen of her domain. Ethan Carter stood on his porch, beer in hand, watching as the last city inspector's truck pulled away. The verdict was final. Beverly was officially removed from the HOA board, slapped with thousands in fines for water theft, and forced to pay damages to her own neighbors. For a woman who had once held unchecked power over this community, the fall had been swift, merciless, and strangely poetic. Nick kicked back in the chair beside him, shaking his head with a smirk. "So, thinks she learned her lesson?" Ethan took a slow sip of his drink, watching as Beverly, now stripped of her authority, knelt in her ruined yard, pulling at weeds that had sprouted in the aftermath of the flood. He didn't feel pity for her, exactly, but he didn't feel victorious either. "She'll either learn," he said finally, "or she won't. Either way, she's not our problem anymore." Nick grinned, raising his bottle in a toast. "To poetic justice." Ethan clinked his bottle against Nick's, exhaling as a weight he didn't realize he was carrying lifted. The neighborhood was quieter now, freer. People had started speaking up, questioning rules they once feared. And while Beverly might never admit defeat, she no longer had the power to dictate their lives. But the real kicker, the whole thing had gone viral. Nick's video, a perfectly edited montage of HOA tyranny, soapy revenge, and Beverly's glorious downfall, had exploded online. Clips of the foam tsunami swallowing Ivy Creek had turned into memes, and the internet had crowned Beverly with the ultimate title, the Bubble Queen. Ethan wasn't sure what was funnier, the fact that Beverly had unwittingly become a symbol of HOA corruption, or the fact that people from all over the world were now sending Ivy Creek donations to restore the neighborhood Beverly had once ruled with an iron fist. She's gonna hate that, Nick chuckled, scrolling through the comments. Ethan smirked. That's what makes it beautiful. For a long time, he had thought fighting back meant sinking to Beverly's level. That justice meant winning at all costs. But in the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about standing up for what was right, about knowing when to fight and when to let go. Because power, it's fragile. It doesn't come from rules or titles. It comes from the people willing to follow. And when those people wake up and realize they don't have to listen anymore, that's when real change happens. And speaking of change, if you love this wild ride in Ivy Creek, where one HOA dictator's reign ended in the most ironic downfall ever, then buckle up, because there's so much more to come. Hit that subscribe button for X Daily Stories, your front row seat to gripping tales that twist, turn, and leave you thinking. We're dropping fresh, cinematic stories every week. Drama, suspense, and poetic justice served ice cold. This is just the beginning. More twists, more turns, more stories that prove karma always finds a way. See you in the next one. Stay sharp, stay free,